Sex is not just about penetration. I find that for a lot of people, it's the penetrative aspect of it that bothers them.
It's very hard to want to connect sexually with someone who doesn't make you feel seen and cared for and valued and respected.
You take sex off the table because I know a lot of people who don't want to have sex, but they want to have that cuddle, they want to kiss, they want to do other things.
Hello and welcome to Love Matters. I'm Leeza Mangaldas, and today we're going to be talking about the very common yet very delicate matter of sexless marriages and the larger issue of sexual dissatisfaction in long-term relationships. I have a very special guest I'm going to be discussing this with, but before we dive in, I want to take this opportunity to request you to please rate and review our podcast wherever you're tuning in. And now let's dive in. Have you ever wondered whether your marriage or relationship is meeting all of your sexual needs? Do you ever find yourself feeling a lack of fulfillment or wondering when the last time you had sex was? If you do, you're not alone. And to dive into this topic with me today is none other than Seema Anand, one of my favorite people on the internet, sexuality educator, award winning author, storyteller. She really needs no introduction, and she's someone I look up to so very much. So I am delighted that we get to talk about this very important yet unaddressed topic together today. Seema, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. Just to also say that you're one of my favorite people on the internet.
Seema, we're so lucky to be in the positions that we are, where people feel like they can be vulnerable with us, and we're on the receiving end of so many stories. And I know that sexless marriages and sexual dissatisfaction in long-term relationships is something you've been thinking and talking about a lot lately. So should we start off with just a little sampling of some of the sorts of stories and concerns and issues that you're hearing about from the millions that follow you?
Absolutely, Lisa. I think the interesting thing, first of all, is to say that this desire to not be sexually involved with your partner, it isn't just the typical stereotypical narrative that it's the woman who doesn't want sex and the man wants sex. I think the first thing we need to address is the fact that it could be either partner. And even in queer relationships, there is very high likelihood of one partner not wanting sex, not wanting to actually have I guess the term sex generally means penetrative sex. And I think that there's a lot of people that actually don't enjoy the act of penetration, and there can be so many reasons for it. But the problem is that women have it's sort of we've come to believe that women do not like to have penetrative sex. It is of no interest to them, it's of no pleasure to them, and we kind of decide that it's always the woman. And the sad part of that is that there are a lot of people from other genders who are actually suffering this emotional baggage of not wanting it either, but we don't address their needs, and it's a bit of a mess.
There's several sorts of issues that are all very common, right? Well, on the one hand, I mean, the idea of sexless marriage can sometimes refer to a marriage that was quote unquote never consummated, where sex has never occurred. And in societies where arranged marriage is the way marriages occur, which tends to still be the case in India, that is perhaps something that, you've never had sex until you get married, and then maybe you don't have sex. That's one thing. But the perhaps even more common issue is of a sort of sexual incompatibility or a dwindling of a sexual connection, or a mismatch in sort of sexual desire, or you're no longer as sexually connected or attracted to your partner, or the sex you're able to have within your monogamous relationship is not quite the sex that you wish you were having. And so there's a whole bunch of issues at play. But what would you say are some of the most common causes of any sort of amount of sexual dissatisfaction within a relationship? Because many people in these situations just don't know what they can do about it or how they landed up here, you know?
So I think I want to start with three basic things that I find happen. One is that we're told so consistently in certain communities, in certain societies, sex is a bad thing. This is an evil thing. You should never do it. I mean, it's made into this demon, and you're never supposed to have sex. And then suddenly you get married, and you're supposed to be rampant. You're supposed to be this lioness going crazy in bed. You have no idea. You've come from this point of being told it's really bad, and suddenly you're supposed to be doing it and enjoying it. Because let's face it, if you don't enjoy it, you won't want to do it again. So there is that huge issue. The second is, of course, this narrative that we have of this is girlfriend material, this is wife material. So this is the woman that I will sleep with, I can have an affair with, I can do whatever, but my wife has to be this virgin that comes to me. And the bigger problem with that is that it doesn't actually switch even after you get married, because I get so many people writing in or talking to me about the fact that they can't think of their wife in those terms. And hence, there is still this issue about, thinking that you can actually have pleasure with that person. So that's the second thing. And the third major issue is that, as we know, in any relationship, after a little while, things start to go down a little bit. Your passion that you go in with is not always going to be at that peak. You have to work at it. And a lot of people just don't realize that that is something that they need to do. So I think those are the three biggest things that come into play. And in terms of, there's a lot of things, right? Because you and I can talk about this forever. The fact that women face pain or it becomes monotonous and boring, that's an issue that's never taken into consideration. And finally, something that's never ever talked about, but the fact that guys are just always expected to love it and be on top and be really out there and fiercely wanting it all the time. And a lot of them don't actually enjoy it in certain positions. I'm always saying how every position comes with a certain set of emotions. It's not just a bland kind of lie back and just physically feel it. It all starts up there. So, yeah, I think those are basically the things that lead to this problem.
You spoke of how the baggage around what we've been taught about sex and the sort of sexual shame most of us inherit can often be something we really have to unpack in order to have a fulfilling sexual life. Would you want to talk about the sort of unlearning you had to do when you got married?
Absolutely. I mean, there was all of the, when I was young, when I was at university, we were told only fast girls enjoy sex. So the term for being not the good girl was that you were fast. So yes, you had to have sex, but only fast girls enjoyed it. And at some point, because we're taught to believe that this ideal woman status is what every woman should be aspiring to. We're given platforms, we're given pedestals, and then we're told, if you can be this sort of woman, you can be worshipped as a goddess. You will be incredible. You will be the woman that will be looked up to. How many of us clambered onto these pedestals for ourselves because that's what we thought was expected of us. So, yeah, I definitely grew up with the belief that enjoying it was not a good thing. And so you come with all the guilt, because the moment you masturbate, you're like, oh my God, I enjoyed that. How dare I? And when I'm with my partner, should I be showing that I enjoyed this bit? Because will that make me feel more judged? There's just so much nonsense that comes with it. And I just want to say, I was reading this passage. Um, Again, I think it's from the 12th century, and where this woman says that she's with her partner and she's a virgin and this is her first time, but she's so passionately carried away. I mean, she's so in the flow that she really enjoys it. And the man at the end of it looks at her askance, because he's like, well, how come you enjoyed it so much? And she sees the doubt on his face. She doesn't say anything to him, but she gets up, and on the wall, she makes a painting of a lioness giving birth to this cub. And the cub comes out, totters onto its feet, looks around, and understands immediately it has to hunt for its food. And it says, well, some things are an instinct. They come to you naturally. But I was thinking, 1,000 years ago, we were fighting for the fact that we can feel sexual in ourselves. We're still fighting that same battle. Nothing has changed very much. So, yeah, I had to actually learn to understand that as a woman, I have the right to feel pleasure and that it's okay to feel pleasure. It's not a bad thing. Um, and then allow myself to feel that pleasure from inside me. Or to say, well, actually, I enjoy this. This is what I want to do. But it took a lot of doing.
I feel like I'm very privileged to be in a position where I would never have to make the decision to spend my whole life with someone without first sleeping with them, or spend my whole life with someone at all. But I recognize how much, or rather, how small a minority of people in our society have that privilege. You know, most people end up having sex for the first time after marriage, and the assumption is unless things are completely insufferable, you stick with that partner. And so I think not only is the idea of sexual agency, you know, if you have desires, you must downplay them. That's one part of it. But also, if you don't have, like, what if you're asexual, you know? You often are still in a marriage where you're expected to have sex and have a kid. Or, I mean, there's so many, you know, queer people who are stuck in heterosexual marriages and can't opt out. And I often get a lot of sort of pushback for suggesting this, but I am of the opinion that we should strive towards making it more acceptable for couples to, at the very least, discuss their sexual preferences and desires and aptitudes before marrying each other. I would say, like, let's have sex before we decide to get married. But if that's too much, if that's too, like, baby steps, let's at least talk about it, you know? It would save all parties a lot of disappointment if we knew going in how we experience desire and arousal and whether we're a good match sexually, because it's possible that we're just not a great fit, you know, and sexual compatibility is important, but people refuse to acknowledge this. It's as if sexual compatibility will be God given or something, you know?
You're just supposed to have it. It's supposed to fall into your lap. So, two very interesting things. Recently, actually, somebody wrote to me about this, saying that if it's an arranged marriage scenario, how do I approach? Is it ethical to ask the person what they feel about sex? And how can I ask it? And I actually made very careful notes. I haven't done that video yet, but I made very careful notes about, when you absolutely don't know somebody, how would you actually approach that conversation? You can't say, well, what do you think about sex? Because if you don't know the other person, that doesn't come across very well. But what are the words you could use? Would you say, could we, how do you feel about physical closeness? And do you think that we should work towards it? And if the other person is truly very, very conservative, possibly, then you perhaps talk about boundaries. You say, okay, how would you set boundaries in the relationship? What about in this aspect? What about in this aspect? And so on. So I was trying to come up with the right kind of terminology to approach the subject. And then I thought, but actually, no matter how carefully you put it, like you just said, actually talking about your desires is so taboo, it's so judged that I think a lot of people would just not be honest about it. So I don't know whether we would get very far with this. But also, I have to tell you, I did a talk recently about pleasure. And when I came off that stage, I had a whole lot of the audience come and talk to me. And this young man, very young man, Leeza, very newly married, came up to me and he said, so are you married? And I said, yes. And he said, are you still married? Like, yes. And then he said, oh, do you have children? And I was like, yes. And he said, oh, I'm sorry. I just assumed that you got divorced and then you went off to explore all this pleasure. So the idea for such a young man who's so newly married, that it is not the wife that you explore pleasure with, that she's not for this. Do you know the number of people who write in saying, my boyfriend says that he looks at other women on the internet because he respects me too much to do the things that really excite him. And hence, he will do it for other women who obviously are not deserving of that respect. But it's just, I mean, look at the layers over there that need to be unpacked.
Yes, there's definitely the Madonna complex, where somehow a woman cannot be both respectable and sexy, and your wife should be respectable. And a marriage is supposed to be respectable, not sexy, right? There's like this sort of deeply unsexy uh, persona cast upon marriage. And I think that it's really unfortunate, actually, that the idea of sexual pleasure and agency and like you're supposed to actually not even experience desire, right? Once you're a wife and a mother, it's like the only time you're allowed to is after you're engaged and before you're married, in order to keep your husband's interest alive or something. Your same caste, same religion, opposite sex husband, and then you should have a kid, and then that's it for you, right? Moms aren't supposed to be sexy. um,
No, but at night when your husband wants that sex, then you're suddenly supposed to turn into this lioness, this rampant lioness who is ready to. And it's weird how this idea of the woman who's been very pure before and now is still very pure, but turns into this sexy siren at his command has almost been built into the purity um, label that you become this person when that legally officially married opposite sex husband requires you to be. It's just such a screwed up idea.
It really is. And yet, what is quite interesting, and you talked about this a little at the beginning, I get as many messages from men as I do from women about a sense of sexual dissatisfaction in their long-term relationship. So there's lots of men who will be like, my wife would never give me a blowjob, or my wife doesn't seem interested in sex, or even when I want to initiate and want to give her pleasure, she's uninterested. There's also lots of women who are like, my husband is wonderful in so many ways, but I don't think he understands my pleasure. I've never had an orgasm. I'm married for 10 years with 2 kids. I don't think I have ever experienced pleasure during sex with my husband. My husband cannot keep up with me. I feel like a feral animal in comparison. I am barely getting started and he's done, and then so that makes me not want to have sex. Or we haven't had sex in 5 years. Do you see the same? I imagine you do.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And also women in this case, because of the gender inequality, I guess, women saying that if they keep insisting that they want sex, that the husband then says, "Is that all you ever think about?" And a lot of them have said, it upset me so much that I've just stopped asking."
Yeah, and I mean, I guess one thing that anyone watching who's going through this can perhaps take some solace from is that it's extremely common. Like, you are not alone in this issue. And perhaps by acknowledging it and hopefully talking together about it, you can try to find some ways that enhance your sense of connection and vulnerability together. Do you have any suggestions on how couples can, in an empathetic and kind way, approach this matter? Because so often we're afraid of bruising a partner's ego, or it's a delicate matter.
It's a very sensitive subject. So I always say that the way to actually, I mean, we've tried to say for a long time that change the definition of sex. Sex is not just about penetration. I find that for a lot of people, it's the penetrative aspect of it that bothers them. For a lot of them, that's where the real problem comes in. It's boring, it's monotonous, it's painful, it's the hard work for a lot of people. So changing your definition of sex would be incredible. Try some other stuff, make that bit longer, make it more exciting. But for that, you have to obviously unlock something over here which says we can talk about pleasure, we can discuss things that we might actually like. But I always also say that the way to bring sex back into a marriage is not by demanding sex. Because if you get really cross and you say, "But I want the sex," the other person will do it just to keep you happy for a bit. But there are so many reasons why they don't want to have penetrative sex in the first place. So if you're not addressing that, unfortunately, it's not going to make the situation any better. My first suggestion always is, and I think that a lot of people don't do this, is get comfortable being naked together without actually having sex. So find yourself sometime once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, whatever, where you spend 15 minutes, put a timer on if that's what you want, 15 minutes in bed together, not having sex, not even getting all hot and heavy about it. Lie down naked next to each other and cuddle and talk about work. Talk about the emails that you didn't send, talk about the lunch you went for, whatever. Just talk about ordinary stuff. But get reacquainted with the feel of each other's skin. So many of us forget what the other person just feels like, the warmth, the comfort of just being with each other, naked in each other's arms. Just that. But I want to basically say that the most important thing over here is you take sex off the table, because I know a lot of people who don't want to have sex, but they want to have that cuddle, they want to kiss, they want to do other things, but they feel that if they get to that point, the partner is then going to say, well, we're here now, we may as well have sex. So it's very, very important you take that off the table and say, okay, we're definitely not having penetrative sex. Let's have this cuddle first. Let's actually get reacquainted. Let's build up that desire from within us. So I think that's something that is really, really important to do, because also, like I said, for so many people, there's almost this pressure because it feels like so much work. It's like, I'm tired, I'm stressed, I can't think of doing this, I can't climb on top and sort of put myself through all that effort. It's seen as a chore, Lisa, for so many people. So I think, yeah, building up
Regardless of gender.
regardless of gender. And I think that actually, because men are never allowed to say that it's not something that they enjoy, this becomes the go-to excuse. It's a real chore for so many of them. I interviewed this young queer um, male sex worker recently, and he said, you would not believe the number of men in really powerful, important decision-making positions who come to him to have sex where they can be at the bottom, where they can just give up this idea of being in charge and just lie down and feel the pleasure.
I suppose being able to relinquish control can also be very arousing. So, communicating about what it is that turns you on. And I meet many women who like wish they could, while of course there's women who find sex to be a chore, and it often comes from their own pleasure being neglected, and because they haven't had a partner prioritize their pleasure sufficiently, that penetration becomes seen as a site of duty, pain, and shame instead of a site of pleasure. If somebody spends like half an hour on foreplay and then ensures there's clitoral stimulation during penetration, many women really enjoy it. And there's also women who will say, like, I wish we could have sex for longer and more penetration even. So it's hard to generalize the problem, right? Although the overarching sense of like, within this relationship I don't feel sexually fulfilled, maybe the common thread. There's so many permutations and combinations of what the dissonance between what you want and what you're getting might feel like. But I do also wonder whether, to some extent, uh, our inability to ask for what we want makes this like an even bigger problem than it is. So perhaps we'd all benefit also from coming to terms with and acknowledging our desires. Like, do you think that, particularly for women, even just familiarizing yourself with your own body arousal and desire can make this easier?
Oh God, yeah, we both know that unless you know where your pleasure points are, I keep saying to people that yes, the clitoris is a pleasure organ, but everybody likes their clitoris touched differently. So frankly, if you touch my clitoris a certain way, which is just going to give me anxiety, which it can because it's a very sensitive organ, I won't want you to do it again. And it can make a lot of women feel really uncomfortable. So we really need to know what we like. But I think the first thing is there's a lot of women who and a lot of men who really know what they want. They will try and communicate to their partner, but they get judged for it. And I think that's the next thing. So again, one of the things I get from people is, oh, this is against our culture. And again, I have been pulling out verses from our ancient texts just to say, no, it isn't. I brought out this beautiful verse. Again, I think, can't remember what, probably 1080, where it says that the guy says to his wife, he says, today, I'll be the woman and you be the man. And she says, no way, I won't do that. But immediately takes off her bangles and puts them on him. So, just this idea of acknowledging that sometimes you just want to switch roles. You want to feel differently. Every position, like I said, comes with its own emotions, its own energies. And we need to acknowledge that. And sometimes the energy of a particular position just doesn't do it for you. Um, Again, the Kama Sutra has these incredible ideas. So women had this one of the 64 skills actually of the Kama Sutra, which is known as the Shayan Rachanam, or the art of making the bed, where women could make the bed. They could fold down their sheets in such a way as to let their partner know whether they were welcoming him there that day with happiness, with anger, or with indifference. So it depended on how you're feeling. So it was important for you to know how you felt. Now you've communicated it to your partner non-verbally, and it's up to them now to approach you according to how you're feeling. Is that just so important? Because every day you are feeling different. Men had this thing of they were supposed to shape their nails in a certain way. So if you were very high energy, very high sexual energy, you shaped your nails in 3 points, like a saw almost. If you were medium energy, you shaped it in like a parrot's beak, one claw. And if you were really low sexual energy, you had sort of flat, almost like a crescent moon. And that showed your partner to be what your sexual energy was if you were visiting a courtesan, for instance, or whatever. That showed them what your desires were like, what your energy is like, and they then approached you in a certain way. I think it's so incredible that we had these little details to communicate our desires, our feelings. More than our desires and feelings, our energies.
I love that.
And then, you came together according to what felt right for both of you.
And let's talk a little more about the factors outside of the bedroom that so often sort of do impact how we feel within the bedroom, or our willingness and openness to sexual connection. I find that, for example, if my partner has been negligent or disrespectful, or sort of angry in that masculine way that I find insufferable for no good reason, I have absolutely zero desire to be sexual. Absolutely zero. And I could have been sexual, like I could be ovulating, like positively feral, but you have ended it by being disrespectful to me, or by like neglecting to do this obvious thing that you were meant to do, to make me feel cared for, because you need, you would. Do you know what I mean? Um, I'm sure you know exactly what I mean.
Yeah,
And I think,
I do. I do. It's not just for your partner and actually the sex that you might be having. Even if there's somebody that you fantasize about regularly, and if it's somebody that you know, and if you use that sort of fantasy for your pleasure moments, if they do something to put you off, you go off wanting to fantasize about that. I mean, they actually destroy your desire to think about them during your points of pleasure. So, yeah, I totally know what you mean.
and I think we don't sort of think about that enough. Like, what are all of the things that have happened today, or in the month, or in the year, or in the last 10 years that have impacted my ability to connect with you sexually? Because I think resentment builds. I think, there's so many small dismissals, small microaggressions, or acts of disrespect or a lack of care that can accrue over time, such that eventually this person who you thought you once desired and loved just seems like your roommate now, you know, who you happen to be stuck with because you pay rent and have
Yeah.
whatever shared ecosystem, but you don't actually feel a sense of, you don't even think that they see you in all your expansiveness. It's very hard to want to connect sexually with someone who doesn't make you feel seen and cared for and valued and respected, and at least That's my experience. And I think for a lot of people in marriages, that tends to occur
I think
where
everybody.
there's this sort of distance that comes over time because there's so much else also factoring into your life as a couple, right? It's family and work and in-laws and kids and household chores and work stress and money and like all this really unsexy stuff that takes such a toll. It's kind of hard not to crumble for the sexiness not to crumble under the weight of all of
Yeah.
that. And I wonder whether there's more that we can do on a daily basis so that it's not 5 years in where you haven't had sex for the last 16 months that, like you're trying to fix things. Instead, you are actively working on maintaining a balance from the get go because it takes work, right? It's not love and desire are not magic. They're active and
You have to work with them. Yeah. This is another thing that I fight against a lot because you get so many youngsters going, oh no, what do you mean you have to work towards it? Oh, this should be natural. There's nothing natural about love and desire. It has to be worked on very, very carefully if you want it for the long term. Yeah. So interestingly, a few months ago, I was in India and I was driving from Dehradun airport to Rishikesh. And the driver, my driver, who started to chat to me, and he was saying about, his work not going so well. And then he was talking about how his wife's health has been a certain way. Anyway, he talked about various things. And then he said, but my wife is the most lovely human being. I adore her. And then he went on to say that, we love each other so much. Doesn't matter what happens, but we never ever say a cross word to each other. Like if I think she's doing something wrong, I'll tell her really lovingly. She feels I'm doing something wrong, she will tell me really lovingly. And we just always make sure that that love is always there because she is such a wonderful person. And I almost burst into tears because I thought, God, how many people could actually use that lesson? I spent years with my husband, who is typical North Indian. He's now 72, so he's literally from that era where, a man's role is a man's role. Saying to him, sorry, but you spoke to me like this yesterday, and I just don't feel like being in bed with you. Sorry, I'm not turned on. And could he get it? No. It's like, what do you mean? I mean, because it didn't matter what he had said. He was always ready for it. Always noticed when I was annoyed with him, but you spoke to, but yeah, I just feel that if we could be respectful, I think far more than love, it's respect. You need that respect with each other, from each other. And I always say that I think one of the best ways to build up a bond is to do stuff outside of the outside of the house together. So when you go on a date, don't do your typical candlelit dinner where you sit across the table from each other. And there's all this pressure because, oh my God, this is a romantic candlelit dinner. What the hell do we talk about? And you end up talking about the children. Instead, go on an activity date. Learn to spend time with each other. Learn to do stuff that makes you think, I'm really enjoying the time I've spent with my partner. We went on a hike together. We had so much fun doing this. It creates that bond. You want to come back and you want to hang out and talk about things that you did. And that then leads to the next bit. Sexual chemistry doesn't just drop from the heavens. We believe sexual chemistry is just that first little bit when you first see somebody and you get an instant erection or you get that instant sort of jump to your heart. That's not just sexual chemistry. Sexual chemistry comes in so many different forms. But it's like everything else. We're given one definition for everything, and then we're expected to live in that one definition. And when that one definition doesn't turn out right, then it's like there's nothing there.
And our relationship to sex can also evolve over time. The sort of sex that you may want in your 20s might be a bit different from in your 30s.
It's completely different. And by the time you're in your 60s, it's very different.
And I think that kids are another factor that can take a toll on the sexual life of a couple. It's often cited as one of the things that makes it quite hard, especially when you have a very young kid. Just practically speaking, there's like this little creature that needs your attention all the time. including at night. Maybe you don't have a home big enough for the kid to have a separate room, and there's so many factors to consider, especially in India, where so often you live with your whole extended family. Like, privacy is such a scarce commodity. Um, wh- uh, what has your experience been in that regard? And do you have any tips for couples who are struggling to sort of rebuild a sense of sexiness and intimacy after having a baby?
So, yes, definitely. I think it is really important to maintain some thread of that. So, like I said, I think that for most women, at least after childbirth, your body is so exhausted, and frankly, it can continue to be exhausted for a while. It's not that, okay, I've had the child now and I've had my 40 days of rest, now I'm back. Your body doesn't feel up to it. You are mentally, emotionally, and physically exhausted. So, you definitely don't want the pressure of being told that you have to have penetrative sex. And you may not want anything more than just your hand being held or a kiss or whatever. I think that it's really important at this point for your partner to understand that there needs to be a lack of pressure put on you. And it's really weird, Lisa. I just want to also say that as somebody who has been pregnant 3 times, during my pregnancies, my libido would go soaring through the roof. It was so high. When I was pregnant back then, there was no internet to sort of play with in those days. Porn was a lot more difficult to access, but written erotica. My friends would just buy me books on erotica. That was my reading. I read those books a million times over because I just needed it. I needed it so much. You have the child. And so at this point, your husband is really, really nervous because he's like, oh my God, you're pregnant. I don't know if I can have sex with you. And then you finish, and now he's waiting, and you're like, no, now I can't do this. So it is a mess. It is a physical, hormonal mess. But it is also the reality of what you go through. And I think it is so important to understand that she is going to be, at this point, very, very tired. You can't actually deal with that. One of the things that I really do recommend for people who need sex at that point is you can't do it if she's not up to it. Don't force it because, my God, that's not going to lead to a good result. Audio erotica is a great thing to actually play. Lie down and play it together. Even if you don't end up having sex, you both do feel like you have come together. Like, literally, you've shared that moment and come together. You need to find these things to do, but it is very important to actually hang on to it because, from a woman's point of view, you're just tired. You're like, go away. I don't want to know anything more about this. But somewhere, as the kids start to get older, you need to keep that contact somewhere, the thread, because reigniting that spark after many, many years is extremely difficult if there hasn't been some firewood left over there.
I think that also recognizing all the ways that you can sort of fulfill your own need for sexual pleasure, because to some extent it's also like scratching an itch, right? So whether it's audio erotica or self pleasure with of any kind, whatever you like, I think at least if you're able to recognize that you have the capacity to perform that self-soothing behavior and look after your own base level requirement, you can operate from a place of not feeling hungry. Do you know what I mean? I think to some extent people are so frustrated because somehow they see their partner as the only viable source of fulfillment for this need, when actually, whether you're single or in a relationship or whatever, nobody owes you this thing, right? It's sad that in our laws it's codified in such a way that it's almost like the wife owes the husband sex. Marital rape is not even recognized as a crime here. So I think that this sense of entitlement is something that doesn't serve us at all. If you just feel entitled to something, you don't do enough to keep that spark alive or that firewood that you mentioned, right? And then you hold it against the person that they're withholding this thing from you. When I think agency is so central to sexual fulfillment being something both parties feel and feel committed to sustaining. And I actually think also, while a lot of the things technology provides can be very beneficial in this regard, whether it's erotica or toys or ethical porn or whatever it is, and people should explore and um, see what they can do to meet their own needs if they're in a situation where their sexual needs are not being met. But I also think that technology can be a very detrimental aspect to relationships. Like, your phone is competing for your attention. Couples get into bed and they're on their phone, both parties in opposite directions looking at their phone, right? I've been there, don't we? I mean,
We make our bed unsexy, don't we? We make it unsexy. Yeah.
I think that and how can any human being compete with the level of stimulation that the device can provide, right? You can consume new pieces of media every second, one more entertaining than the next, and then news and recipes and movies and it's just like this overstimulation machine. And I feel that actually technology has like left me feeling a little dead inside sometimes, where you just 2 hours have passed and you're still scrolling on your phone, and now you're too tired to like be intimate, and so now you're just going to go to bed, and you both just watched your own things, and instead of connecting, putting away that phone, making eye contact, really talking, because you're so tired after a long day. And this phone is something you associate with some sort of like, and I'm not even watching porn, okay, I'm talking like Instagram or my emails or Shopify or whatever. And it can be so difficult actually to have the discipline to shut down, to give yourself like a few hours when you've decided this is the end of my workday and phone and all of this stuff. And I'm really honoring the fact that we need sort of a bridge period to connect, to even get to a place where we feel like being intimate.
Do you know what the Kama Sutra recommends for this? It's really interesting. It says that, a lot of people tend to jump into sex. So it's like, okay, well, we've decided we'll have sex. Now I'm going to kiss you a little bit, then a bit of foreplay, and then it's right down to penetration. It says before you actually start anything, before you even start the kissing, you have to sit and exchange stories. So they talk about it in terms of stories where you exchange naughty stories or gossip. Anything that makes you kind of go, because that shifts your brain from whatever you were doing earlier and it brings you into the present with your partner. You've now created a connection where you've been together. You've forgotten for a little while whatever was going on outside. And I think that's such a clever idea, that bridge period that you were talking about. You've got to come back from whatever it is that you were doing in the outside world and actually focus. And I think that yes, you could potentially have fewer days of sex in the week, but schedule it and say, this is my day for sex with you, and then make an effort. In ancient times, we hear constantly about how when you went to make love, you dressed for it. You ornamented yourself. You thought of it as something special and beautiful, and you got excited. And it's very much like before you come to live together, you go on a date, you schedule it, you dress up, you want to look your best. It is all the effort that went into something that you were looking forward to doing. We don't today. We tend to look at it as something like, okay, fine, yeah, we're having sex. Let me go and wash my face, put off the light, we all do that. You put it on an old nightie, and then, yeah, I'm in bed. All right, here I am.
Don't check your phone right after, also. Yeah, please.
Leave it be, turn it off. But yeah, there is this thing. So many people will kind of be like, oh, but those messages are waiting. And I keep saying to people, when we had lockdown, when we had COVID, the world shut down and life continued. In the same way, if you don't look at your phone for, let's say, 1 hour, it's going to be okay. Give it an hour. Like, honestly, the messages will still be over there.
Be present, right? Be present.
Yeah. Be present and make yourself be present with different rituals, with doing different things. Get ready for this. Bathe, put on perfume. I don't know, do anything that you think makes it more special, but do that because each little act makes you a little bit more present. But it does really come back to the desire to do it. It really does eventually come down to, yeah, I'll do it this time. It was our anniversary and I want to do it for us. But tomorrow's not my anniversary and I don't want to feel that I want to make the effort anymore. I've got other things to think about. And I think, yes, you can have any number of relationships that do not have sex, but the bond that this brings for you cannot be replicated by anything else. And it is a worthwhile bond. It is really a worthwhile bond to have.
As we near the end of our hour, I want to ask just two questions before we close. And one is that I think a lot of people also overestimate how much sex other couples are having. You know, like, oh, we only have sex like twice a month. I'm sure all these other couples must be having sex every day. So, can we talk a little bit about sexual frequency? How, while on average it's something like once a week or something at most for couples, the largest group falls into that, I think, statistically, and whatever information is available from global surveys. But also, there is no one single formula for this,
Mhm.
right? And how can couples arrive at a sort of sense of contentment around the sex they're having? Is it a quality over quantity thing, according to you? And also, how can they get to a point where there's an understanding of each other's aspiration for that?
So I think that we overuse the word communication, but we don't think about its meaning enough. And I think communication is key. We use that word a lot. We throw it around a lot. It is so important to have that conversation, to say how you're feeling. And like I said, even if you say, okay, once a week is what we're managing to do, make it count. The rest of the time, it's you may be too tired. Do the cuddle. Do all the other stuff that goes with it that keeps the fire burning. But if you feel that there isn't enough time for that, or it's going to put a strain on your time or your relationship or your annoyance levels, maybe sometimes, um, don't do it more than that. But make it count, make it pleasurable, make it really fun, make it something that I always say that the way that you finish this time depends on how quickly you come to each other's bed the next time. So we always remember an incident either by its peak, at the point where it was at its best, or by the way something finishes. And most of us will remember something by the way that it finishes, how you felt at the end. And I think that it is so important to remind yourself of these little things. If that feels really good, whatever you're doing at the end, extend it a little bit more. I think it's called the refractory period, isn't it? The period after sex. And it's really important. Again, the Kama Sutra says that at this point, it is really important for both partners when you finish. You go away separately, get cleaned up, changed, and then you come back together because it gives you that time to reset yourself, to press that reset button. Because everybody finishes differently, everybody feels different at the end of it. But if you're coming back together to then have your meal, to then cuddle, to then exchange stories and conversations, it's something that you're going to look forward to. And I think that that's what makes, as you go into a long-term relationship, as you're together, different things become more important for your sexual pleasure. And I think one of the things is those moments of feeling really loved and cherished that you spend together. So I think, yeah, that's extremely important.
My final question, and it's a difficult one, I guess. Some people might not like this question, but I'm of the opinion that sexual incompatibility is valid grounds to end a relationship. If you don't see this working out, like, I think it's worth trying, and trying with intention and a sincere attempt at salvaging things if you do enjoy being together enough to try. But it is also okay to opt out. I'm of the opinion. What do you think? I think there's very little support for people who feel that way.
I think that we need to actually say this out in words because, Lisa, a lot of people do, in effect, opt out of the relationship by having affairs. People do sometimes feel that they need to stay together because of shared finances, kids, etc. But they will go and find other ways of doing this. And I think there are people who would like to end a relationship because of sexual incompatibility and try and find somebody that they might feel better with. Whether that means that they're having roaring sex is not really the point, but just that, you and I both know that sexual compatibility can mean so much more than just somebody who has penetrative sex. It is respecting the other person's boundaries, desires, needs, satisfaction levels, etc. All of that comes into it. So I think, yes, it is definitely something that people should be able to consider. I think that society doesn't look at us very kindly when we say something like this, because, like we said at the beginning, marriage is supposed to be this unsexy institution that is just meant to be about duty and responsibility and not about pleasure and happiness. That's a little optional extra. If you get it, you're lucky. Otherwise, well, tough. Um, I know that Anvita and I did a podcast on this some time ago, and Anvita said, well, actually, if you cannot find sexual satisfaction with your partner, and after having tried, your partner says, absolutely no, I'm sorry, I'm not even going to go there, then the other person is completely justified even in seeking pleasure elsewhere outside of the relationship. So I don't think that we should be putting down boxes around people. I think that different things matter to different people. And if sexual compatibility is really important to you, then I see no reason why you should have to spend a lifetime not having sexual pleasure because you were dealt a particular hand.
Thank you, Seema. I completely agree. And I think that people, we might have raised some eyebrows at the end of this episode, but I just want to say that it's not that we're trying to encourage any sort of dishonesty. I think we've been saying all through that it is so important for people to be able to talk about this stuff, But I can also empathize with how profoundly alone you can feel when you feel this deep sense of an absence of this sort of fulfillment, and it feels like you are never going to get it despite your best efforts. And so I hope that with kindness and empathy, couples can choose to part ways when you realize maybe this was just not the right fit in this regard.
I mean, on a personal level, I will tell you, I've been married almost 40 years. 40 years of relationship, you go through a lot of troughs and peaks. It's nothing is going to be smooth sailing. And we did go through a period where things became very bad for the marriage. The relationship was not going well. And it certainly showed up in our sex life. It wasn't something that either of us found satisfying or good or even wanted with each other at one point. And we did have this conversation because I remember my husband saying, well, then I will have to go and find it elsewhere. And I said, perhaps that's what I need as well. Maybe I should also go and see if that's what I want. If this is not being satisfactory for me. So we did actually talk about it. Now, neither of us did step out of the marriage at this point. We were able to work through our differences. It took time. It took a lot of fighting. It took a lot of communicating. We did work ourselves back to our relationship. But it is a conversation that we ended up having. And it's there in the back of everybody's mind. So I think that we do need to talk about it.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being so candid and so insightful as always. It was such a privilege to have you on Love Matters, Seema. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, darling.
And thank you so much for tuning in to Love Matters today. I hope that you enjoyed this episode and do share it with anyone who you think might benefit from listening to this conversation. Love Matters is produced by Indian Express and DW, Germany's international broadcaster. And as I said, we would love to hear from you. So please do rate and review this podcast, leave a comment. You can even write to us at lovematters@dw.com. For now, this is me, Leeza Mangaldas, signing off. I believe love matters.